Hello and welcome to the very first event of the Manufacturing Transformation Series titled Integrated Business Planning, the Power of Aligning Sales, Finance, and Supply Chain. We have a great lineup of speakers who are all leaders in the manufacturing industry and eager to share insights with you all. Let's go ahead and kick this off with our very first speaker for today, Mr. Edward Roski.
Thank you. Wonderful introduction. I'm here today to talk about how we can take advantage of the possibilities of today. And we're going to get started by a quick video. What does the world look like that we're living in?
Once upon a time, there was a renaissance, a rebirth. This was the era when science and logic conquered magical thought, when civilization was elevated out of darkness, when men and women stopped looking only at the outward appearance of the world and pressed for answers on how it all works, on what lies below the surface. This scientific spirit led to technologies like the printing press, which empowered the first information age and foisted into history an era of common understanding and uncommon innovation in science, in culture, in politics, and in commerce. Just as that explosion of perspectives and technologies propelled mankind forward over 500 years, a new digital renaissance has arrived to, once again, revolutionize, remake, and recharter the world. This new renaissance, this digital renaissance, has made the magic seem mundane. And many of our most coveted visions and hopes are coming to pass. Tickets into space, vaccines in months, doorstep deliveries in hours. This digital renaissance is creating a platform for transformation even deeper than that of its predecessor. Like the printing press before it, the technologies of the digital renaissance, when used masterfully, shine light into the darkest corners, helping all master the unseen world, helping all conquer complexity, and helping all turn dreams of change into effective action. And all these raise our collective expectations for the human experience.
Welcome, everyone, to the Digital Renaissance. The Digital Renaissance is a time of opportunity. It's a time for companies that can dream big to seize the day, and for companies that don't challenge their core beliefs to be disrupted right out of existence. In the Digital Renaissance, we're all reimagining how we interact with the world. But this isn't new. As humans, we always have ambitions for a better future. Longfellow once said, "Ambition is so powerful a passion that however high we reach, we are never satisfied." And sometimes those dreams turn into reality. We invent a technology, a solution, a means of delivering on those ideas. But just having an invention doesn't deliver that technology to the world. That's where we come in. That's where companies come in. Corporations exist to enable that technology at scale. That's how it's always been done. If you look at every period of innovation, the Italian Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, the semiconductor explosion, the digital Renaissance, every time there is a fundamental transformation in how the world functions, it's because companies like yours have stepped forward to deliver on those human ambitions. January 29th, 1886, Carl Benz applied for a patent for his, what he called, vehicle powered by a gas engine. Very creative. Now, to be clear, he was not the first. The first actual vehicular powered carriage, engine-powered carriage, was a steam engine in the 1700s. And there'd actually been internal combustion engines in the 1800s. There was even an electrical vehicle that was pioneered. But in July of 1886, the newspapers reported that there was the first public outing of the three-wheeled Benz patent motor car, model number 1. Now, what were those people doing from the 1700s up to 1886? They were trying to solve a problem. They were trying to make a carriage that didn't need to be pulled by a living creature and all those fraught issues with living creatures. So Benz and all those others before him had tried because they had this ambition. They wanted to make a horseless carriage. So what did Benz do? He invented a technology. And it went absolutely nowhere. Even though he actually had it and he could create it, until corporations started getting involved. Because corporations, companies figured out how we can start to churn out those automobiles, churn them out in scale. Look to Henry Ford. Ford Corporation, Henry Ford, they didn't invent the car. What Ford did is they popularized it. They took Benz's technology and they said, how can we modify this and expand it to deliver it to the masses? He knew that you couldn't deliver a car into every working person's home if you had to build them one by one in a bicycle shop. So what he did is he invented a more straightforward model, a standardized model, and then invented an enabling technology, because corporations also have ambitions and corporations can make technology and they can use that technology to scale. So Ford invented the conveyor belt. And as such, he delivered an automobile that any working person could, theoretically at least, own, because that's what manufacturers do. Manufacturers like you figure out how to deliver innovation at scale in a cost-effective way. But we always have problems thrown at us. We're talking more as an example than anything else about the COVID-19 pandemic. The level of change that it has accelerated in the last year and a half has been insane. It's taken all those problems that had been building up, all those needs to modernize, to become more agile, to become more integrated, to have excellence in our processes, and it just forced them to the front. All these problems came up. We had optimized ourselves to the point of we had inventory arriving and we just assumed it would always keep arriving. So we started saying, well, there's, using my automobile example, there's a case of we just don't have enough microchips. If you think of a modern vehicle, it's really a computer on wheels, and everything, whether it's the airbag, the control unit, the braking system now requires a microchip. So if we have a supply chain issue feeding into us, it's going to stop our ability to actually make a car, and that lead time extended. I wrote an article recently talking about one of the manufacturing winners in COVID-19 analysis. It was Toyota Corporation, because Toyota said, we know that there will be a time when we start making cars again because people start buying cars again. And most of the auto manufacturers said, well, when that happens, there will be enough microchips to go around and we'll have a pretty big heads up. Toyota actually looked back at the 2011 tsunami. And they had a problem back then because they thought, yeah, everyone's going to stop buying cars right now. When they do, it's going to ramp back up slowly. It didn't. Back in 2011, it went from off to on overnight. And they left themselves going, if this ever happens again, we're going to stockpile chips. We're going to stockpile those things where we're 100% dependent on another organization. And we're going to get away, at least temporarily, from just-in-time inventory. We had all of our supply chain bottlenecks. It started in February of last year with the entire province of Wuhan shutting down over in China. And then we found how dependent our entire organization was on single-threaded supply chain delivery. One of the early problems with getting medication out to deal with COVID-19 is that 80+% of the world's pills are actually manufactured in China. So as China was shutting down to try and control the spread of COVID-19, the medication the rest of the world would need to deal with it, we had to switch around those bottlenecks. And lest we forget, all it takes is one little ship going a little bit to the side, and next thing you know, our entire supply chain is bottlenecked all the way from India and China delivering all the way over to Europe. But it's not just external. What we also discovered during COVID-19 is that we have a misalignment issue. We had each organization was theoretically optimized as much as it could, but it was optimized independently. So we had a sales organization that was going out and selling at top speed. We had a procurement organization that was focused on minimizing costs, even if it meant that they didn't have multiple options in their supply chain. They wouldn't go, well, this one vendor, if we give them all of our business, they'll give us the best price, they'll give us the best delivery, and they've never failed us in the past. So they didn't have those multiple options. We had operations that was reliant on getting all of those products in, also having all the people and all the machinery and everything necessary to staff it all. We had finance trying to keep track of the going forward budget by looking backwards at the past. So finance said, well, what will my plan look like going ahead? And what were they using to generate that plan? Quite frankly, it was information assuming the world wouldn't change that quickly. If you look at how most organizations traditionally budget, it assumes there is one budget. And there's a number you can come up with 15 months ahead of time that tells you what you're going to be doing for the entire following year. That makes complete sense in a world which is not changing. But if I may quote Graham Wood, the world has never changed this fast before, and it will never change this slowly again. So how do we take and get sales priorities aligned with procurement priorities, aligned with operations priorities, aligned with finance priorities to make sure that we're all driving forward? And we have to realize that we are victims, in a lot of cases, the receiver of things happening completely outside of our control beyond COVID-19, beyond whatever the external disruptions are. We now have raw materials that are going through a massive fluctuation. All it takes is a ship turning sideways or a wildfire, and next thing we know, our commodity prices are fluctuating wildly. So we have to make sure that we don't just plan for one number anymore, that any plan, any forecast we create has a range of values, that there's a best case, a worst case, there's what if the price of our base commodity skyrockets? What if it plummets? What if maybe we're actually a manufacturer of a commodity product? What if the demand skyrockets? What if it plummets? And we all have to make sure that we broaden our supply chains. We're not tied into a materials cost coming from a single supplier. We're starting to see a lot of penalties coming in, especially if we're manufacturing, delivering to a consumer packaged goods, delivering out to maybe an end retailer. We are a link ourselves in the supply chain. And it wasn't an issue when everything was functioning perfectly well, but now we're starting to see these penalties show up where they're pushing backwards on us and saying, we need to hold you accountable, because if you mess up our ability to deliver our product to the next step in the supply chain, we're going to hold you accountable because we're being held accountable for it. And people lose faith. If you look back at customer and brand loyalty, there were people that said, I'm a Ford guy through and through. That's what I've always done. It's what I'll always do for the rest of my life. But right now, Toyota, their factories are functioning at over 90% capacity. Most of their competitors, including Ford and others, are operating at 50 to 60% capacity. If it's time for your new Ford and you go to the lot and the only one out there is lime green, and you go, well, the Toyota lot seems pretty darn full, people are going to switch brands because we are loyal to the point of when it makes sense. And when that loyalty is challenged because we're not able to get our products out there, we're going to switch what it is we do. But here is the greatest thing about the last 18 months. We have found creativity in our processes, found creativity in our people, found creativity in our organizations that has been hidden, dormant, if you will. These challenges that we've faced have triggered this wave of creativity. They've triggered a digital renaissance. They have caused all of us as manufacturers to find new solutions. Now, to be clear, the problems that we're facing are not new, but the digital renaissance is forcing us to look back at those old problems with a new eye. The CEO of Hyatt has a term he calls déjà vu. Deja vu is seeing something and going, wow, I think I've seen that exact same thing before. He calls it déjà vu, which is looking at the same old thing, but looking at it with a totally new perspective and saying, with my knowledge I now have, how could I functionally do that differently? So what we have to do is we have to look at those problems, and we have to look at them with all the lessons that we've learned, with the technology that we've developed. We have to look at it with the wisdom that we've cultivated. We have to ask ourselves, how can we solve the problems of yesterday, but with the knowledge that we now have today? All of us are amazingly good at adapting. As organizations, we have survived to this point because no matter what the world throws at us, we're able to survive and adapt. And we did that over the last 18 months. Our products started getting out. We figured out how to change around our supply chain, our development, our sales, our operations, but we need to keep adapting because we can't be doing it in panic mode. We have to make sure that whatever processes we put in place, whatever technologies we adopt, whatever people we bring to bear, that they're able to deal with whatever that challenge is. The secret to success is no longer stability. If you go back and read a strategy book from 30 years ago, they talk about barriers to entry. Get big and make it so nobody else can come into your market. Well, look at all of the little upstarts all around the world. What are they doing? They're focusing on agility. So they're saying, okay, if I encounter a wall, how can I go around it? So what we have to do is we have to look at these not as disruptions waiting to put our company out of business. We have to look at these disruptions as opportunities. Is there a way that either through people, processes, technologies, experience, brand experience, user experience, connections, partnerships that we're building with people either giving us our core commodities or that we're passing to the next step in the supply chain, how can we take those opportunities and how can we build competitive differentiation? How can we make ourselves stand out? Because the barrier to entry is getting smaller and smaller every single day. So what we have to do is figure out how we are going to differentiate. Now we're going to talk over the next several portions of our manufacturing transformation series about some of the ways that manufacturing is changing and some of the ways that we can bring sales and finance and the supply chain, how we can bring them into alignment. So we're going to talk about some of the more rising technologies. You can actually predict, time to machine failure to within about 5% nowadays using artificial intelligence, using machine learning. What is the cost savings if I do so? What if I go fix that machine? Or we can now predict what are the likely bottlenecks going to occur in my supply chain. We can predict remarkably well what is my supply and what is my demand. And if you think, okay, wait a second, but isn't it somewhat out of my control? How come I can't look at history and say, well, what impact is that going to have on the future if the world suddenly changes? Turns out we can now bring in external data. Through the power of big data, letting AI and ML, artificial intelligence, machine learning, sift through it all, we can bring in all of that information and say, what is the consumer confidence index? What is the level of inflation? What is our consumer sentiment? We can take it all the way down to an individual zip code level, postal code level. We can take it country by country. We can start having better communications with our providers of product and our receivers of product. We can take that data and use it to predict what that supply and demand curve look like. What is the power of that information if I had a better idea? We can also start to get better integrated. We can say, well, we can understand what are people doing on the ordering side, whether it's CPG, consumer packaged goods person, pulling information from our manufacturing system, what type of products are they trying to configure or price or quote, or if we are delivering something to an end consumer, what does that look like? We can take that information, we can tightly align it with the ERP, we can use EPM, enterprise performance management, to analyze all that. And the key, as I said before, frankly, it's agility. It is not stability any longer. You can build something that is remarkably stable until the earth starts shaking. I was in Greece over the last couple of weeks, and it's amazing how many of their great temples and amazing castles, like this castle stood for 175 years and it was destroyed in this earthquake, or Santorini, absolutely beautiful. It was probably the historical home of Atlantis. Oh, and then a volcano exploded. And it's like, go over to Crete. It's absolutely amazing, but there was a tidal wave, wiped out their shipping fleet. They weren't able to get food and they disappeared within 100 years. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that we're integrating with our data, but that we're flexible. Traditional data warehousing solutions, traditional business intelligence solutions assumed that you would keep asking the same question repeatedly. Well, nowadays, every question leads you either to a physical action or it leads you to a deeper question. And if that greater question you want to ask requires rebuilding your entire data warehouse, or if it requires, well, we have to go to IT and wait 2 weeks to 2 years for them to get the report or analysis back, the world will pass us by. So what we're trying to do now is take that historically really large database, that massive amount of data warehouse, lift it all up into the cloud where it's agile, where it gets more functional all the time, where we don't have to worry about the support of it all, where it's actually designed not for storage of information anymore, but cloud applications are designed for retrieval of information. They're designed for analysis. So we can do things like take financial analytics warehouse, where Oracle worries about figuring out how to have it talk to the cloud ERP. We're able to take and pull information out of that, pull it out in real time. Because our goal is to make faster, better business decisions, to deliver the right information to the right people at the right time. We need to increase that reliability. We need to make sure that our customers trust us and that we are delivering through on that trust, through people, through processes, through technology. We are going to talk some about technology over the next several portions of our manufacturing transformation series. Here's the good news. There, at least in terms of enabling our foundations of our business, there's not a technology that doesn't exist. We just have to go grab it. Now, we might need to create a new technology to improve our manufacturing process. Just as Henry Ford invented the conveyor belt, there might need to be something. It's like, oh, we need to create a new artificial intelligence solution. But the technology is already there. Now, I was looking at a lot of the attendees today. We have 25 plus people just all here talking about manufacturing and how it's transforming. Well, a lot of you come from a finance background, a sales background, a supply chain background. A lot of you also are traditional Oracle customers. Oracle has an integrated business planning solution that doesn't just take supply chain a budget and attach it to a financial budget and say, there, my job is done. It actually focuses on the execution side. So in their case, it's called IBPX. How can I take an integrated business plan and then execute it, deliver it to action? A lot of you also have Oracle EPM Cloud. How can we use it? How can we take it and break down those silos of data so that we don't have financial data that never meshes with human resources data, that never meshes with sales data, that never meshes with operational data? How do we take and bring all that together? Now, technology, as I said before, is a tool to help us realize those ambitions. It doesn't help deliver it. We have to have people generate those ambitions, and people have to deliver them. So one of the things that we're going to talk about over the next few weeks is how can we better connect those departments? How can we take what are right now silos of data and at minimum make connected silos? Imagine, if you will, that the field, the second the wheat is harvested, something delivers it automatically up into the harvester, delivers it automatically up into the silo, and the silo delivers it automatically to the waiting train cars, delivered automatically to all of our shipping fleet, delivers it all around the world to our end customers. Can we do the same thing internally? So even if we can't break down those silos and put all of our data just overnight up into the cloud where it's shared for everyone in our organization, can we at least, as a bridge, take those silos and begin to connect them? Because we can't keep operating in a world where finance controls finance data and all they ever show people is financial information. Human resources controls people data and all they ever show is people data. We have to take, for example, those two, bring them together and start showing P&L by department divided by headcount. So you start understanding, where is my spending based on how many people are actually there. We have to take that supply chain information and feed it automatically up into that budget for the financial forecast. To do this, it's a matter of communication. We have to improve our communication. We have to improve our collaboration. We have to start working together. How do we do that? It's processes. It's a matter of figuring out what information sales needs to do their job, what information finance needs to do their job, what information the supply chain needs to do their job, and bring it all together into one common place. And make sure that they're all driving, not at internally optimized targets, but at a target that works for everyone. If you have sales out selling, let's say they're really pushing the new bright red cars, and all we have on the lot are lime green cars, well, we either need to improve our supply chain, get a hold of sales, or drop our budget because no one's going to want to buy what we're selling. So how can we align that S&OP over with that financial plan? So what we're going to talk about today is one solution, one step that we're going to take on that roadmap to solving everything. And that area is called integrated business planning. So integrated business planning helps us stay ahead of all of those challenges, no matter how fast the world is changing. So instead of doing planning in system A that never talks to system B, that never talks to system C, integrated business planning gives us this real-time window into where we're going. Traditional planning is like driving a car by looking in the rear view or the side view mirrors. It's this broken process that spends more time looking backwards, looking at what already happened, and then trying to use that information to predict the future. It doesn't, traditional planning, even though theoretically it's about the future, it doesn't look at what's changing in real time. It assumes, as I said before, the world is changing very, very slowly. But integrated business planning, this opens up this constant dialogue. It opens up a dialogue about where we're going and what actions we're going to take to get us there. It blends the plans for the future with where we are right now. It lets us actually have a discussion, and a discussion in real time. Is this where we want to be going? What actions will we take if that is indeed where we're going? How will we deal with it? How will we respond? Integrated business planning is about building bridges between departments instead of silos. At minimum, if you're like, yeah, we're not going to be able to align our strategic plan with our financial forecast, with our sales plan, with our operational plan, with our constraint-based plan, with our demand plan, we just can't do it right now. At minimum, in the manufacturing world, we have to share. We have to integrate our plans between the supply chain, the S&OP side of the house, I guess S&OP side of the factory, align our supply chain with the financial side of the house, of the factory. That's a great place to start in the world of integrated business planning. But you have to do it now. You have to do it while there's a little bit of downtime. Because, and I hate to break this to you, COVID was not the final shove we're going to have into the future. It was just the most recent. Now, I'm not trying to predict, knock on wood, this will not happen. There's not going to be a COVID-22 or a COVID-23. There's probably going to be a COVID-19 variant of the Delta variant. And that will keep happening for a long time. That might be something that's here with us to live, but we know how to deal with it now. No, a disruption will come from a totally different direction. And it will come for us again, not industry by industry, as a lot of traditional disruptions have. It will come at us again with this global impact. What are they? I have no idea, but we can expect them. It's like no one can expect the Spanish Inquisition, but you can expect some sort of Inquisition-like thing to occur. So since we can expect these future disruptions, we have to prepare now. So today, we're taking that first step on that journey. And I'm happy to be doing it with all of you. So we have a lot more information to impart on future series, but I'm thrilled to be going on that journey with you. I think this is an exciting time for all of us. So to help us discuss some tangible steps that we can take along that winding road into the future, I'd like to introduce Titan in the manufacturing industry. He uses a lean methodology to drive value through technology. He's passionate about he is passionate about attacking waste wherever he finds it. He's the former chief information officer of Pella Windows. He's now the chief executive officer of Lean Tech Advisors. Everyone, get on the edge of your seats and put your hands together for the keen man with a lean plan, Rick Hasman. Rick, take it away.
Thank you, Edward. That's fantastic. I don't even know if I can repeat the keen man with the lean plan. That's an introduction that I'll always remember.
Yes,
and I love following.
Trademark pending. You can. Yes.
And I love following Edward because in life you need to reflect on opportunities for improvement. And as I watch Edward present and I look at his slides and how he presents, that allows me to reflect that I definitely have opportunities for improvement in creating my slides moving forward. But we do have a very consistent message. Stefan Ronchetti, I'm going to let Stefan introduce himself when he does his demo. But together, we're going to take a lot of the concepts that Edward talked about and take it into a level deeper. Really talk about the importance of the integrated business planning now. But as Edward says, this is a beginning. And if we do reflect a little bit, we've all gone through these experiences with our companies in the past, where we've had gaps, we've had breaks, where the bridges were not there between the companies. So we'll talk about maybe what the volatility is exposed, but we'll dig into that a little bit deeper in this discussion. So a little bit about my background, as Edward said, I spent a long time with Pella Corporation, was the CIO there, but also spent significant amount of time in the manufacturing arena there. Spent time as an executive at Oracle and at another financial reporting company, and now have created Lean Tech Advisors. And it really plays directly into this integrated business planning. When you look at it, when there's disconnects, there's a lot of waste in the process. There's a lot of handoffs that don't occur, or they can occur improperly. So I like to look at things and look at it from a process standpoint and identify the waste, and then leverage technology to attack that waste. Excuse me. So this quote here, when I was preparing for this, it encompasses a lot about what I want to talk about today. You know, volatile times require functional alignment and agility enabled through integrated business planning. So when you break that down, volatile times, well, that's self-explanatory. Edward talked significantly about that. But a functional alignment, that's the bridges. That's the bridges between the company, the functional areas within the company, and the agility. We've had to react faster than most companies have ever had to react, in their life. And they've had to do that and stay aligned. Some have done it better than others. But today we're going to talk about the challenges and the importance of building that integrated plan to handle that agility and the volatile times and really drive that alignment. So I'm going to dig a little deeper into the example Edward gave in a second. But what we've really seen is the supply chain has exposed the vulnerabilities. We see it everywhere in every aspect. We're remodeling at our house. We ordered appliances in February, and we have some that have expected delivery dates in October. That's never happened in my 50 plus years. I've never seen that. And that's happening with companies that I work with in their supply network, in their transportation network, in their labor. We hear about the labor shortage. All of these areas are affecting businesses in some aspect, and aligning those and figuring out how to get the most out of them is what's really critical. That's the integrated business plan. So the automobile shortage that Edward mentioned, if we go down a level deeper as to one of the reasons this occurred, it's around the chips. So if you look at the chip industry in itself, the automobile demand only makes up about 3 to 7% of the chip volume, but the automobile demand dropped. So the automobile, as they do, they think kind of they're the big folks in the supply chain. they didn't commit and assume that they'd be able to get their volume back. Well, that didn't happen. And it didn't happen for several reasons. One, as you see, they were a lower volume, which makes them a risk for the suppliers. The chip volume or the manufacturers are running their plants all at about 95% capacity. So they don't have room. They have to be running at that high level to make money. So when the demand drops, they were going to fill that. Well, where did the surge happen? All of the kids staying home needed computers. All of the remote workers needed computers. So the computer industry gobbled up that utilization, and we're not going to let go of it. So then when the demand came back for the automotive, it wasn't there. They couldn't get it. The other piece, when you think about how automobiles are built, it was a weak link in their design. They've got some models that have 38 different controllers that are manufactured or procured from 7 different vendors. Think about that. Now, that problem that we just talked about from a utilization, from a risk, is times 7. What ended up happening is what Edward talked about and what I experienced when you went to a car lot and you saw one car sitting there that could be pink and nobody wanted to buy it. And you couldn't even get the cars because the cars that were being delivered were all sold before they got there. So what do? What does the automobile industry need to do? And this part is looking at ways to mitigate it. They have to understand, and we'll talk more about that. If they would have understood and appreciated their supply chain, they would have built in longer term volume commitments. They wouldn't have assumed they could get the volume back once they dropped it. And they would have to reallocate some of that risk, whether they assume it through the longer term commitments, but they'd also need to change in their manufacturing industries their need for this. We've seen some, Mazda is a company that decided to build their own chips. And that's a way that they could reduce that risk. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. The key thing, as I said in that quote, is that you need to have flexibility. And we've seen, if you think and look through the industry and folks that you've been involved with or companies you've been involved with, they've had to react, and people have reacted in many different ways. Some have been able to invest and mitigate some of their labor shortages through a capital investment. You've seen lead times extend. You've seen prices go up, supplier changes that have occurred. There's a lot of different ways, but as you look at integrated plan, you have to align all of these. And one key way when you look at this sales pitch, many companies have not coordinated that effort. They have not changed how they sell. They've not been able to articulate and communicate with the buyers the effects or the impact. That's one key thing, a term that Pella, we always prided ourselves in, was reliability. Changes in the market are going to happen. And you're not going to be able to mitigate all of those. But a good integrated business plan allows you to understand the impact of those, align, and then be reliable to your customer. That means you do what you say you're going to do. That doesn't mean you don't extend lead times. That doesn't mean prices don't increase, but it means that you've got enough alignment, you understand your business, that you can communicate with your customers and then meet the commitments that you make. So what are things that occur or need to occur as a result of the pandemic? And as Edward said, you know, as the future pandemics, and many of these were really best practice to begin with. One, you've got to create this transparency. You have to understand the components in your supply chain. You have to evaluate and identify where the risks are. You have to identify alternatives. It's a risk analysis that happens almost in every project that you do, but many companies don't take the time to really go through their supply chain and do that same type of analysis. Then you need to optimize your capacity. You've seen many folks that they assess their capacity and they really drive improvements in a single area. They improve their line output, but it didn't matter because they didn't address their logistics issues. They hired people, but they couldn't get the supply information come in. This is really optimizing throughout the entire channel and making some hard decisions, but they have to be aligned. You have to align those so that you can get the most out of what you have. And assessing your realistic customer demand. That's always a discussion. Every company that I've worked with is, do we trust the forecast? And the forecast, you know, is exactly that. It's your best guess. But during these times and the volatility that's out there, extra effort really needs to go in to truly understand your demand. You have to have the discussions with the customers. You have to really dig in because you're making hard decisions everywhere else in the process. So it's really crucial to understand that, because you can't, there's really no room for error. On the lower part of this screen, you can see a lot of just your internal understanding of your inventory, of your capacity that I mentioned through the optimization. You have to understand your entire value chain. What inventory do your vendors have? What capacity do they have? Ability to increase their capacity? What alternatives do you have? And you know, even creativity of buying WIP products, or a lot of different capabilities, just looking at depending on what industry that you're in. The logistics piece is critical too. You know, it really is driving the optimization of a limited resource. And transportation has become very limited to folks. I've seen companies and worked with them that have been able to increase their internal output only to realize they can't get it delivered to the customer. And you see that at ports right now on both coasts. You see product that we've brought in and was the original bottleneck to get it manufactured. Now it's sitting at ports and we can't get it to the manufacturing facilities that need it. And then the alignment that Edward talked about from the manufacturing, the operations, and the finance is really critical. You have to be able to understand the impact of longer lead times, of alternate resources, the need for capital investments, it may be earlier than anticipated. You have to be able to manage that along with the plans and you know, present that picture to the company to ensure that everybody's aligned and the best decisions have been made. But I'd like to say, you know, this integrated planning is not just for times such as the pandemic. I remember many discussions internal when I was at Pella around operations understood, got the message from the sales group, but just didn't trust the forecast. And they were being measured off of something different. You know, their operations and unit cost, they were going to hold off because they didn't trust it. And they knew or felt like if the forecast didn't come in, they were still going to be held accountable for a higher unit cost based on increased labor or increased line capacity. The finance was always creating the most conservative budget so that if there was an upside, or if we didn't meet the forecast, the company would still be fine. Well, that drives issues in ensuring that you have the capacity to handle the forecast or even handle when it exceeds. All of these really become part of the integrated business plan, but more importantly, for me, it was how the leadership really drove and measured the core elements within this process. You know, there has to be metrics around operations, but there also has to be metrics to adherence to the integrated plan, not just isolated metrics that are focused just on performance within operations, because that can lead to decisions that are not consistent with the overall plan. So that happens at any time within good times or bad times with the economy and what's happening. So now to get down into a little more specific. So when you think about, I'm going to build a process, integrated business planning process, there are some key things that are critical. Number one is trusted information. Before you can go and have these discussions, you've got to truly understand my capacity. And it's surprising how many companies really don't understand their capacity or the variables that drive your capacity. You have to have forecast at a level that is needed for operations. I can remember many times where we had a forecast at the highest level, and what ended up happening was one particular spot within the manufacturing operations that became the bottleneck. You know, whether it was a circle head line that didn't plan for the volume because the capacity wasn't down to, or the forecast wasn't to that level. Well, what ends up happening then is you've got full order ship, it affects the entire process. So you need to have your forecast to a level that really helps your operations. You have to understand your cost. A lot of folks don't truly understand the cost or the impact of an increased lead time, the impact of higher inventory volumes, overtime. You really have to understand those pieces because those are elements that feed into the planning process. You also have to have this S&OP process. And as Edward said, in many cases, it could be just as simple as, you know, discussing as cross-functional teams what you're going to do, understanding the alternatives that you have, but holding the business accountable for those plans. As I mentioned, I've seen many people that have the discussion, then they go back and do what they wanted to do in the beginning because they're measured and held accountable for different performance metrics. Those are key process and components. If you go into the specifics around the system that Stefan here is going to walk you through, you need to be able to take those components and have a simulation capability. The change is occurring so fast that you need to be able to look at the parameters, the key parameters, and be able to simulate what happens if I change this, create multiple scenarios, do sensitivity analysis that identifies the impact of the changes, and then be able to interpret the results quickly and easily. Those are key. And again, I think Edward will, or Stefan will show you that capability and the importance of that. And then the last thing is you want to track the results. So you do the planning and you want to be able to track, are we adhering to the plan? What deviations are occurring, actual to the projection, and then feed that back into the simulation. That's critical. So all of those components, the alignments and understanding of information become critical to reacting quickly and creating a process that really is reliable and that will stand out over the competition. So now I'm going to turn it over to Stefan, and Stefan's going to walk you through what this looks like within the applications.
Thank you, Rick. As you mentioned, I'll introduce myself quickly before we dive into this. Stefan Ronchetti, Principal Solution Engineer with Oracle. Long tenure in the FP&A space with Oracle on the implementation side, and then with Oracle again now. As I step through this demo for you today, building on points certainly that Rick just covered as part of his conversation and as part of the conversation that Edward kicked us off with, I want to highlight one important thing about this conversation, not the button clicks that I'm going to do, but the tool set itself. As Edward mentioned, part of the issue is removing or mitigating that misalignment of internal processes. Rick talked about the same thing. So the beauty of this is that most of the best ideas are generated not just by one person, but by that group of people, different but consilient talents and the vision that goes along with it. And it's at this boundary, that intersection of people's ideas and their vision, and the reifying of those ideas where most of the value exists. And that's what this tool gives you in this supply chain, this interconnected business process space, is it's not just financial planning, it's not just operations planning, it's not just sales, as you can see here, but it's that intersection of all those types of details. So when I walk through this with you now, we've got the executive overview, we'll touch on that. Operations piece, we'll look at how that interacts and intersects with the financial information, then certainly sales. All of this detail, for those who have not seen this tool before, if you have, this might not be new. This is but a configuration of how you as a group or team of folks could interact with this. If an individual only needs to see operations, that's all I would see. Only sales, that's all I would see. Point is, the tool provides you that space to combine the detail in a way, and as Edward mentioned at the beginning of his conversation, gives you that space to get information that ultimately leads to an action, helps driving business forward. So I've labeled this particular view everything, right? Sales, operations, free cash flow, straight away. An example of quick and easy access for a user group to get the details in the moment to help look at and drive decisions. Common theme through this is not just the fact that the information is there for you, but it's the ease of examining possibilities, whether it's changing geographic locations, as I'm doing right now, or it's looking at the different scenarios or possibilities that have been created as part of the decision-making paradigm. Again, for those who have not seen this particular tool set before, the real driver of this, or the power behind the scenes, if you will, is something called Essbase. So quick little aside here from the actual live environment. Really what Essbase is and does is it allows you to move past that, we'll call it linear dynamic that exists if you're using spreadsheets or something relational in that respect. There's an old Chris Rock stand-up routine where he talks about, we'll go back to the car conversation, where can you drive with your feet? Yes. Is it a good idea? No. Similarly, can you do some of this stuff with Excel? Yes. It's not a good idea. And that's where Essbase provides that power for you to have this integrated business processing. Gives you that ability to look at the buys of your business, whether it's by account, product, geography, supply chain, operations, all of those types of details are at your fingertips as a result of Essbase behind the scenes. And so with that, you get that collation or that aggregation of all that type of detail. So from a purely financial perspective, as you see right here, presents product revenue. And I realize that I've shifted a little bit from the automobile conversation we're looking at in manufacturing and furniture, but the idea and the premise is the same. Is you get your, we'll call it working version, that's in the moment. You've got your target versions, forecasts, and with simple button clicks, as a group, you can pull in if you want to run with an expansion scenario, if you've got a capital addition, all of those items that Rick had talked about and that Edward talked about in terms of possibilities, you as a group are not constrained by the tool set, simply by that, again, intersection of ideas and innovation that people are bringing forward. So we'll now connect the strategic view with a downside case as an example, and you'll see in real time, your targets then in those out years are adjusted in the moment. Not just in this dashboard that you see at the bottom, but any downstream area that is connected to, in this case, product revenue, is going to have that update in the moment. So the financial team is working on it from this vantage point. Operations team is going to see this impact or this change that finance has made, and sales, for that matter, is going to be able to see that information as well. And I point that out, yes, because we're talking about the intersection of all these different groups and plans, but also because the nature of these types of presentations over the web are very linear in nature, right? Slide, next slide, next slide. I'm clicking from one view to the next view to the next. However, in the real world, nothing ideally operates in that linear fashion. You have operations inserting information, you have finance inserting information. It's much more of a, we'll call it 3D view of your business. And so people are working in their space as they need to, with the information updated from those other groups in real time. Similarly, we'll take a look at adding information, seeing it ripple through, yes, from a direct entry perspective, which I'll do in a second, but also the machine learning, predictive analytics that Edward referenced at the beginning. Now, with all of this detail, all of these different products down the left side, the different dimensions, remember the buys of the business, your entity by scenario, by years, et cetera. Changing any one of these certainly pulls in that different intersection of data. Point of this is twofold. Number one, let's have a user run prediction. Excuse me. So what this does for you as a group, it says, okay, we want to see what historical details suggest could be possibilities in some of those future periods. Please note that this is not, you're not required to take the prediction results. This is that measure twice, cut once type of mentality. It's but another tool for you to use to hone in on that most appropriate budget forecast plan, not just for the current period, but any of those other possible periods, possible scenarios that you might be working in. We look down here, there are 3 line items that are yet to be populated. We can see there is historical information, just not been entered yet. That's just fine. This type of detail can be automatically pasted by the tool. Might not seem like a huge deal, but the more you can remove those maintenance types of activities from the user role and allow them to focus on the data, on the analysis, gets those decisions quicker. And I think helps move from a, we'll call it more reactive mentality to a more proactive mentality when you're not trying to cram numbers in just to get a report out. We've got the time, the effort there for you to get the details in. See, with a simple paste, you as a user don't have to manually key anything in. Upon saving, as I mentioned from the prior screen, all of that information is then pushed down, cascaded to those respective reports or analysis points that everybody then within the organization, assuming they have access, can see and hopefully leverage as part of their decision-making process. Similarly, if you would like to manually key in information, idea with all of this is there, button clicks. So I work with a gentleman, part of a group called Express Composites, and one of the comments he has made, I think really resonates when looking at a tool like this and pulling all of this information together. His comment is, if you don't have time to do it right, you don't have time to do it a second time. And so this type of tool within that integrated business process lets you do it right. You're not trying to manage multiple hundreds of different files from multiple different locations. Again, the information is here, that intersection of ideas and innovation between people, groups, and departments. All of this is there for you. Now, this is the revenue side, certainly, as you can see. As an example, I've included some of the expense side as well. Rick, looks like you came off of mute.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the point you made, Stefan, about doing it right the first time, it's so surprising how many companies make a normal process of just going through this and then not really trusting the results. And then they go do it again. And the time it takes for them to gather the information that you just did, they get in the room and talk about it, and it's old news. So these critical things that you're showing on the speed to pull that information in is so essential for driving this process, specifically now when things are changing so quickly. But even in a normal time, everybody's time is so critical for them. So to get in, have the information they need, the most recent information, and they trust the information, makes that process so much more efficient.
Yeah, and that goes, I think, Rick, back to your comment. It's the trust. We can trust the details that's coming through. It makes any decision that much easier on a go-forward basis. And as I step through the rest of this financial side, these are, again, but examples, an expense presentation here. But ultimately, the idea is, right, how does everything roll up and connect together? My last example on this financials or the executive overview front is really pulling all of that revenue, some of the expense, looking at it from a full P&L perspective, and really that summary. And all of this detail, whether it's the configuration that I'm showing you right now, or when I jump into the operations side and show configuration there, this is just a way of interacting with that underlying data, right? Recall that underlying Essbase power that's powering all of this. What I'm doing is just creating a dynamic through which I can access that information. So if this particular creation of mine on the screen right now doesn't make sense for your personality or how you want to interact with it, wonderful. Create another dashboard of this sort for you for the requirement that you have. And that's another one of the really key points you want to bring up. It's not just the fact that this tool can present information to you, is that you as a user get to determine how you present that information to yourself, but also to somebody maybe downstream that relies upon you for that information and how they access and make those decisions. And then, as has been the discussion up to this point, right, there are supply issues. As we've all seen with COVID, it personally came up with me the other day. My son plays a lot of hockey tape. It's not existent at the moment because of supply chain considerations. But for those manufacturers, how do they get out in front of those possibilities, right? The constraints that exist from an operations perspective. Now, I know what's on the screen right now is we'll call it on the more basic side, but I wanted to bring it up just to highlight the fact or the aforementioned intersection of those differing parts of the business. So from a user perspective, if let's say in May, that volume is going to go down in one area, but hey, maybe conversations in place. Maybe there are relationships that exist that allow you to increase in another area. Brilliant. And that's really what this, and going back to Rick's point from before, really enables for you as a group. What are the possibilities, right? You're not reliant on, I believe you said, was it 7 controllers, 30 or 38 controllers in 7 different groups? Too many, maybe is a better way to categorize it. Idea here is you've got those differing possibilities. Examine which mix of those provides you the best possible outcome, regardless of the scenario that you're finding yourself in. And then ultimately, right, it comes down to the reporting. How do you get the information out to those people that need it in the way that is required? Yes, you have the dashboards for you as an individual when you're working through the process. That real-time insight without having to, again, the linear, iterative, okay, let's make a change, report, not good, go back to the beginning. However, there are those folks that still require paper or desire paper or want that type of structured output that is not necessarily dashboard. Okay, you leverage something like you see on the screen here, a financial report. With that trust, as Rick mentioned, that this data is the exact same information that you were just looking at in one of those prior dashboards or entry screens. Keeping in mind, again, with a quick pivot, you've got a quick recovery. If you want to look at that scenario, a base scenario, moderate, base case, best case, possibilities, right? Piggybacking a little bit on, again, what Edward said at the beginning, it's not just about having a plan and following that plan for 15 months and hoping you get stay in alignment. It's how do we make the appropriate decision in real time with the type of fluidity required to drive our business forward.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, Stefan, I've seen so much time wasted in organizations because this information that you're showing here is out on spreadsheets. And the information was all pulled at different times. We've all experienced that. And then you spend part of your meeting trying to understand why there's a difference. Typically you get over it, but you just wasted a bunch of time in here. So the simple piece of keeping these in sync and allowing the users to view it in the manner they want, just a huge advantage with this integrated plan.
Yeah, and you made the point, being in meetings, having conversations about the data. There are certainly those moments in time where you require maybe underlying detail or more nuance or twisting the information, of course, in a positive way, to see or to access a different type of answer. So for those of you who love Excel, and truthfully, Excel is never going away in the finance realm, this has that connection to Excel or leveraging something called Smart View to create a connection to the underlying database, but using that familiar Excel interface. So like Rick just mentioned, say you're in a meeting and questions arise about numbers. Okay, there's no need anymore to say, you know what, that's a great question. Let me get back to my desk, look at my report again, I'll run some numbers, I'll call you in an hour. Beauty of this, you can access it in the moment, live, run through that to a question answer session with, again, multiple different ideas, multiple different people sharing information, coming to a conclusion and getting to the answer that you need. All of these are very similar, right? Income statement scenarios. It's simply taking this information, adjusting it in a report view that compares the scenarios as opposed to looking at just one at a time. I bring this up again to highlight the fact that what your need in the moment might be, this tool allows you to create that view, to access that information, to answer any questions that you might have. Now, the last piece of this, we'll call it operations view, goes to one last point that Rick brought up in terms of items that are very important as part of this integrated business planning process. And that is the ability to run simulations. Okay, so the beautiful part about this tool is not just the fact that you can enter values and, hey, I think it could be this, is within this modeling space, we'll call it, is the ability for you as a group to run Monte Carlo simulations. So taking an item, say on the income statement, whether it's operating profits, I should expand that, I'm sorry. Any of these accounts that you are working with, and run what's called a simulation, using that Monte Carlo simulation to provide to you a range of possibilities. not just a range of possibilities, but it will give you the, we'll call it percentage chance of attaining said value, right? Letting you then, with whatever risk tolerance or risk aversion that you might have, choose to go this route, go another route. Point of it is you get to examine possibilities. And that's been the common theme, right? You're not stuck to a number. You get to examine a range of values. Again, all these different variables are coming into play, from operations, from sales, from finance. Again, Edward mentioned consumer price index as an example. You pull that in, leverage all of those points of data to help you drive to the most appropriate decision on a go-forward basis. And again, if these, as an example, maybe these 6 have been created in prior times that were stable times, if you will, and you need a new scenario to help make a decision in the moment. Unlike historical processes, you're not constrained, again, by the tool. Select any number of accounts. I'm not going to run through the entire build and select every account for the purposes of time, but I'm going to inherit, in this case, lots of methodology or the underlying methodology from one of the prior scenarios that we've run. Point of me showing you this is to highlight how simple and easy it is for a user to create a new scenario, to examine something in that moment. Gone are the days where it's, copy, paste, hope everything is correct, formulas are intact, F9 bracket to try to trace precedents. Now, that part of the maintenance of your process is gone. Going back to a comment I made before, you simply get to focus on the analysis and the numbers and the decisions that derive from that. And lastly, with the remaining couple of minutes that I've got before I transition over to Charlie McGowan, Sales Director at ArganoInterRel, is the last piece, or the third leg of this integrated process stool, we'll call it, is that sales information. We've been talking finance, talked operations, again, higher level, showing how all this information comes together. But then sales plays an integral role as well, right? Ensuring that your finance targets are aligned with your sales targets, are aligned with what operations can actually support on a go-forward basis, whether that's in times of the COVID pandemic like we see now, or any future disruption that's going to occur, probably will occur. You have the ability to not just weather that storm, but quite frequently when there are disruptions, that's a possibility for further growth. So use this information, that intersection of all the different parties involved, to not just weather again, but find advantages and grow your business into the future. With that, Charlie, I will pass it over to you.
Well, thank you, Stefan. So to kick it off, what I'd like to do now is just, if you can click Q&A, we're going to start question and answer session. And I actually already have a question out here. I think this is going to be for you, Rick, a customer example of implications when sales, finance, and operations are out of alignment.
There's so many to pick from. I'll use a cabinet company that I actually was doing some work with. The implication really becomes about a reputation for a brand. So the lead times that get quoted, and these get through a 2-step process, they were quoting all the lead times to their distributors. Their distributors then are dealing with the customers. They get in front of the customer, they're building a plan on when, from a remodel standpoint, when are the cabinets there? And if you think about, the cabinets have to be there before the countertops can go in. There's the sinks and everything that's aligned, and even the appliances. So the manufacturing was changing their lead times, making some specific changes because there was a limitation from their supplier. It was not communicated to the distributors. There was a significant number of distributors out there that were quoting lead times and then had to get into the scenario that every customer hates, every distributor hates, is weekly changes. Well, it didn't ship this week. It'll be next week. Well, it didn't ship next week. It'll be next week. And you think about what image that presents. The manufacturing group knew that that they weren't going to be able to hit those lead times, but they weren't communicating. And in their mind, they felt, well, they didn't want to communicate because if it was a long lead time, they might lose to somebody else. Well, in essence, they lost because they were not reliable and they took a hit to their brand. So that's one example, Charlie, that is, to me, really speaks volumes of this alignment and the importance of being reliable.
Okay, I have one more here, and this could actually be addressed by any one of you, but is there, we did a lot of talking about agile, being agile. Is there a secret sauce to developing agile, flexible systems?
Well, I'll take a stab at that because there's not a secret sauce, and it actually is not something that happens overnight either. It's a process. It's an effort that organizations have to make sure that they put a lot of thought in, meaning, how do I set up my manufacturing lines so I can potentially run at 70% utilization and be very profitable, but have 30% to when spikes occur, or setting up your supply chain to have dual vendors that you drive through that. Those aren't decisions that happen in a day. Those ability to increase the labor force or take items that you manufacture and when volume gets too high, procure from another vendor. You really have to be thoughtful, and that gets into that risk analysis that I talked about. Go through your network, identify where those risks occur within your organization, and identify ways that you could mitigate those. So that's the piece in itself that becomes much more of a process. The technology piece is going to deal with the data that you provided. It can't create scenarios unless you truly have the ability to execute against them.
Okay. Well, I see Taylor has joined, and Taylor, I believe you have a couple of slides to present, so I'll transition it over to you. Taylor is another, both Taylor and I both cover manufacturing for InterRel. So Taylor, take it away. We can't hear you, Taylor.
I'm muted. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Just as a couple of follow-up items or actions kind of post part one of our manufacturing series, we are bringing back Hyperion Solutions November 2nd and 3rd. Last year, when the world was shutting down and all the in-person conferences were being canceled, we brought the Oracle EPM and analytics community together virtually for a 4-day event. It included 75 sessions, nearly 1,500 attendees. And so this year, we understand that Zoom fatigue is definitely real, but we still want to try to get everyone together and provide some meaningful and informative content. So we are going to host a 2-day event with over 25 sessions focused on EPM and Essbase updates, as well as some industry case studies focused on how organizations have made the most of their financial reporting solutions. So save those dates, November 2nd and 3rd, and we're going to be sending more information on that in the next couple of weeks. And then next, save the date. We want to make sure everyone has this kind of marked on their calendars, is part 2 of our 4-part manufacturing transformation series. We are tentatively scheduling it for December 14th. and we are going to be announcing the topic shortly. I think we're actually going to send some follow-up to you all and maybe get some feedback on some topics that you all might like to hear more about over the next couple parts of the series. So those are a couple things coming up, and we thank everyone for attending, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to the team that put this together. Really appreciate all the effort from everybody, and thank you to all of our attendees. And as Taylor was mentioning, please let us know if there are other things you want to hear more or less about in the future, and we'll tailor this for you. This is an opportunity to give back to the manufacturing world that really helps power our lives. Thank you, everybody. Hope you have an awesome rest of your week.